It means that all the pharmaceutical companies fled over to Puerto Rico, hired all these janitors and office work at $6,000 and $7,000 a year, and they get $40,000 a year tax break off their tax bill here in the United States. And they're not subject to United States law on dumping contaminated medicine, on price gouging and cutting and dumping stuff in third world countries. But let's go back to the main thing. I use the word Nazis. A lot of people find that offensive. But let me tell you why I use that word. Let me tell you why. Let me tell you a little bit about my heart. In 1912, in Germany, the chemical manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies and all of them got together and they formed a cartel called IG Farben. And the mission of IG Farben was to make the human body, its ailments, and its cures their exclusive commercial domain. So they grew by virtue of interlocking directorships and trade, manipulating trade. They grew into a monstrous corporation. And they funded the Third Reich. This is a German corporation. They funded Adolf Hitler. And they were the industrialists who put the Third Reich together, put Adolf Hitler together. And they waged war against the United States and waged war against the people. At the end of World War II, IG Farben was broken up by the Allies into three corporations: Bayer, BASF, and Hoist Chemical Company. And the top 22 executives of IG Farben were convicted of war crimes. And they were exiled and put in prison and had other sanctions put on them. In and around 1952, David Rockefeller from the United States goes and gets them all together and secures pardons for them all and comes back and gets them placed in the very industries where they held leadership prior to and during World War II, in the name of making sure that the Russians didn't get ahead of us in any of these things in the Cold War. And those Nazis sank their taproot of fascism into the deep soil of American liberty and freedom, and they've been exuding fascism since that time. Fascism was not defeated in World War II. It was transplanted, and it's alive and active today, and it seeks to overcome the American way of life. Let's talk about that for just a second.
Do you mind by fascism, you mean?
I'm going to define fascism for you right now.
Just to make sure.
Yes, sir. Fascism is the arbitrary exercise of power, or the exercise of arbitrary power, a person or a group over another. Let's say that a king or queen exercises fascism. King doesn't like you, off with your head, boom. That's arbitrary power. I mean, there's no reason to do it, no standard by which they have to act. Okay, and of course the fascism. When they had no standard of which they had to act, when they were offing 6 million Jews and gypsies and Bohemians and other people of lesser ilk, lesser humanity, that was a fascist act. There was nothing that prohibited them from doing that besides the raw exercise of power. The Constitution is an antidote to fascism. The constitutional form of government, as put together by the United States, limits the power of government, keeps them from acting in an arbitrary fashion, grants to the government only limited powers. The Constitution of the United States is not a limit upon the people, it's a limit upon government. For the first time, the government was limited and put in such a form that the benefits and processes of government were to flow to the people, instead of that tyrant, instead of the king or queen up to that point. And fascism seeks to give the government power, or the government by acting outside of its constitutional domain is exercising fascist power. If you read the Constitution of the United States, it only gives the federal government certain rights and privileges, and it only gives the federal government certain areas in the United States that they can actually act. As a matter of fact, the federal government and federal agencies can't act in about 95% of the counties of the United States except by permission of the sheriff's office, because the Constitution does not give them the right to. The sheriff says that they have to get out of Dodge, they've got to get out of Dodge. They cannot come in and enforce a lot of these federal mandates and laws unless they sign an agreement with the sheriff first, which is what they do in these multi-jurisdictional task forces. My point being this, that right now, business and government is acting in a fashion to keep the people down. Government has given certain businesses monopolies over the necessities of life in this society, and a lot of people are getting rich at the expense of the masses of people, and a lot of people are willing to spend whatever money it takes to protect those monopolies. And that is why the chemical manufacturing corporations who manufacture the synthetic fiber, fuel, medicine, and increasingly food, and who do not want the farmer staging to come back and do not want these commodities being produced in the natural cycle, are willing to spend billions of dollars promoting a vicious, capricious, unscientific, fascist war on the people in the guise of a war on drugs. And I call them Nazis. I know whence they come from. And here's where I get into it. In 1954, I was born in Carlisle, Kentucky, poor little county out there. In 1947, in 1953, my family got the first TV set in Nicholas County. I mean, it was about yay wide, it was about that tall, and had a screen about that big. And on Saturday mornings at 6 o'clock, 6:30, my brother and I would come downstairs and turn on the TV and watch it on early Saturday morning. But it wasn't cartoons back then, kids. They didn't have cartoons back then. What we were shown was the liberation of Auschwitz, D-Day in its original form, the liberation of the death camps. That's what I grew up watching. Right after World War II, I was watching what the the fascist form of government did to the people. And you can call me scarred or you can call me patriotic. Maybe I'm a little bit of both. But I got real sensitized to assaults on the American way of life. I got real sensitized to the power of governments gone amok. And I decided right then that I'd like to try to protect America as I understand it to be. And that is where they let people like me raised to adult age without being taken out behind a bar and shot before we get there.
Well, I think that Nixon, when he, just like Hitler demonized the Jewish people, if you will, Nixon pretty much demonized the pot smokers, the marijuana users, as like people to persecute, and fired the flames of that whole thing.
Oh, but that was all politics. Here's the way I see that, Patrick. I came across marijuana in 1968 when a friend of mine who was later became a doctor got back from Thailand where he'd been an airplane mechanic. And he came back and he said, Gatewood, he'd known me in high school. He said, Gatewood, he says, I got something I think can help you. And I said, oh yeah? And he said, yeah. He says, this stuff, marijuana. And I said, well, I've heard some bad stuff about that. And he says, no, I think this will help you, Gatewood. So I said, okay. So we smoked a little bit of it, so I got into the marijuana scene at that age, at that time. And then, of course, we smoked Panama Red and Oaxaca and Mexican and all the Mexican weed. I mean, this Mexican marijuana was great stuff. It was fantastic. I haven't really seen anything better since that time. But then Nixon came along and he pitched Operation Intercept on the Mexican border. He came along and he vilified the marijuana. And he pitched Operation Intercept on the American border, which meant that they stopped all traffic coming across the Mexican border and searched every car. And it tied up traffic for miles. The older folks will remember that back in the early 70s or late 60s. Coincidental with that, the Army started flying C-130 or CA-5 military transports full of Colombian marijuana up to LaGuardia Airport. So what they did was they just took over the marijuana market. The federal government took over the marijuana market. They stopped the Mexican market because the Indians and the poor Mexicans down there were, they couldn't be managed and they couldn't be controlled, and this was an uncontrolled